We at Talking Drupal would like to take a moment to acknowledge the people and Drupal community members of Ukraine. Our thoughts are with you during this difficult time, and we hope for your safety and well-being.
Please go to the Drupal Association Statement of Support link from the show notes to find out how you can help.
This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 337, Layout Paragraphs. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about layout paragraphs with Justin Toupin. Justin is the CEO and founder at Atten Design Group. Atten is a strategy, design, and development company that works with mission-driven organizations all over the world. Justin started the company back in 2000 with a passion for technology and communications, a desire to do meaningful work, and an aspiration to help build a place where people love what they do. Justin speaks publicly on occasion about the design and development process, working with clients, and the business of running a design company. He's a co-maintainer for several Drupal projects, including what we're talking about today, layout paragraphs. Justin, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Great to be here.
As you may have figured out by now, I am John Picozzi, and today my co-hosts are Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design, Development, Enlightened Development.
Enlightened Development, good afternoon. Glad to be here.
And also joining us from Acquia, Martin Anderson Klutz. How are you, sir?
I'm great and glad to be here.
So, Drupal 7 end of life. This one's going to be a little bit of a hot topic, I think, because my personal feeling is Drupal 7 end of life has now been extended for a whole nother year. You got a whole nother year, but that does not mean that you should procrastinate. You should still update your sites from Drupal 7. I saw a number of social posts, right? Hey, Drupal 7's end of life has been extended a whole nother year. Great. I don't have to worry about it. No, you still have to worry about it. You should just get on your horse and start doing it. Anybody have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for this is that we've just seen that the majority of sites on Drupal are still on Drupal 7. And so it just makes sense to continue supporting it. But I have seen what you just said. People are saying like, well, that means I don't have to worry about it now. And it kind of sets precedent for them continuing to procrastinate. Because I've already seen people saying like, well, it's already been extended a couple of times. It's probably going to be extended again. So I really don't have to worry about it. And you know, as revolutionary as Drupal 7 was at the time that it came out, you know, I guess my question is, at what point is it, I suppose we're actually already past that point, but having to support it for 12, 13 years after it came out is, you know, it is a drain on the community at some point. So I'm looking forward to seeing what plans there are to help continue to support people to move off of it, because, you know, as much of a learning curve as there is for Drupal 8, 9, 10 over 7, there's just so much more power and so much more functionality that's just available moving to those. So yeah, I as a community, we definitely need to move off of 7, but but yeah, I've been seeing the same comments.
We've been talking a lot about this at my agency, and I think that perspective is really important. That we should see this as extra time for those who really need it, and not encouragement to stay on Drupal 7, or the idea that, you know, Drupal 7 is kind of where the future is for the platform. I mean, as you've said, like very little innovation happening with Drupal 7 at this point. It's still pretty important for people to find their, you know, to plan their migrations and the next move. But for those who need it, and it's still a pretty significant number, for those who need it, the extra time seems critical.
Yeah, I saw on social, you know, the idea that like people are like, well, you know, everybody should just have to move to Drupal 7. And I don't disagree with that as far as like moving to Drupal 7 is the thing to do. But I do think that perspective, as you said, Justin, is important because some organizations don't necessarily have budget for that move. And that move is far more expensive than they thought it would be, right? Because as we all know, a move from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 or 10 isn't a migration. It isn't like this nice thing that it is in Drupal 8 to 9 or 9 to 10, right? It's like, hey, I'm basically able to migrate my content and then I have to rebuild my whole site. So there's a good amount of cost that comes along with that.
Yeah. Which is the way, I mean, that seems like that's the way it used to always be with Drupal. When we first got started with Drupal back in version 4.6 and going from 4 to 5 was a rebuild, 5 to 6 was a rebuild. I mean, usually 6 to 7 rebuild, 7 to 8, hopefully one's last rebuild, or 7 to 9 at this point, 7 to 10.
Yeah, I certainly had a couple of sites that I upgraded from 5 to 6 to 7. In fact, I think I have one site running today that's on 7 that did that. But the truth is, if you had any complexity at all to it, you couldn't do that. It worked for this site because it was pretty much a blog. Right. And in fact, we're probably not moving to Drupal 9 for that client anyway. We're probably moving to, Squarespace or something like that, because it's literally just a blog that the client maintains, and it doesn't make sense to move, that to Drupal 9. And for me, like this extension, this news doesn't change anything for me. Like I've told all my Drupal 7 clients, because I still have maybe 8 sites, I think, that are in Drupal 7. They're all smaller. I told them all, like, you either need to upgrade to 9, which isn't feasible for most of them, or move to another platform, or your site is shutting down. And I'm not going back to them and saying like, oh, well, we got another year, because it's just like it's a drain on the community. I don't have, I'm at this point almost 5 years removed from working day in, day out on majority Drupal 7 sites.
Yep.
So even just like having to remember how something works sometimes is like, okay, it's going to take me, 10, 15 minutes to get in there and figure out where to make this change, what module we're using. Because I just haven't been working in Drupal 7 for that long.
No infinite storage space in your brain for Drupal 7 knowledge, Nick.
I'd like to maybe just chime in quickly and put on my Acquia hat for a second. Just mention that there is a tool called Acquia Migrate Accelerate that's really designed to augment kind of some of the really good migration tools that are built into Core, but to add some automation and kind of a visual interface to that, so that instead of having to write a migration through YAML files, it kind of gives a nice point and click UI to help make that process easier.
Yes, there are tools out there, which is awesome. The Migrate API is awesome. And, I think, Nick, you are absolutely right. And I think that part of this is like, hey, like now it's not as much of a fire drill, right? To say like, oh, we have until November, like we have to hurry up. You have a little bit more time, but you should still be moving on the path to migration. Let's move on to our module of the week, which is, it's a well-timed one, at least for me. I'm working on a JSON API project right now, and I was just about, literally, it was like Martin was in my head when this tweet came out, and he was like, hey, take a look at JSON API node preview tab. And I was like in Postman trying to figure out how to get to my local. And like, I was like, I just need to see the JSON. It shouldn't be so hard. And here came the Drupal module that did this. So again, the name of the module, JSON API node preview tab. And it does exactly what the module title says it does. It adds a nice preview tab to your node, so that way you can see your JSON API output right from your kind of node view, node edit screen. And it works great, I will say. The only I don't know if it's necessarily an issue, but I went into the issue queue and saw that some folks were saying that you need to have a certain browser extension installed. I'm using Firefox, So I installed I think it was called JSON Lite extension. And just like that, boop, in an iframe in my tab in Drupal showed up my JSON API. So anything you'd like to add on that, Martin?
Just point out that the idea came from one of my colleagues who had mentioned that one of the, I guess I would say, competing pure headless CMSs offered that as kind of a nice little feature. And one of the things that's amazing about Drupal is its versatility, right? So it's great for, what we would call an integrated website, but also different kinds of either pure headless or hybrid headless applications. And it was super easy to put this module together. So I think it really speaks to both the versatility and the modularity and extensibility of Drupal.
We'll have to get a show together about JSON API and all the fun add-on modules that you can add in there. But today we are not talking about that. Today we are talking about layout paragraphs. What is layout paragraphs?
Yeah, so thanks, John. First, again, just really great to be here and excited to be talking about something that I have been spending a lot of time both working on and talking about. So layout paragraphs specifically is a tool that combines the layout API in Drupal, which is the system for essentially providing layout structure, the subsystem in Drupal. It combines layout API with paragraphs and then creates a really easy to use drag and drop interface for managing those paragraphs or moving paragraphs around in various layouts. So it makes it basically really easy to create layouts using paragraphs. And that's at least a good place to kind of start.
I mean, obviously it enhances paragraphs, right? But like, I don't know if we want to get too much into the nuts and bolts, but like, what does it do?
Yeah, sure. So to jump into the nuts and bolts and kind of dive into the weeds for a minute, layout paragraphs essentially provides two components. One is a field widget for working with reference fields, with paragraph reference fields in an edit form, like in the actual node edit or whatever the kind of parent entity is. It works, it should work. It works regardless of what that parent entity is, most often used for nodes. So on one hand, it's a field widget. And again, it provides, when you turn it on and you have paragraphs configured, where we'll get into this a little bit more in a minute or two, but where one of your paragraph types is used for structure, is a layout section. The rest of the paragraphs are content, typically is the way this is configured. As soon as you turn it on and enable that widget, it provides an interface where you can very easily choose the different section types that are available through the layout API, and then start populating that with paragraphs. So actually write content into those paragraphs. Again, the whole goal was to make it really just incredibly easy for people that work with content to do that, to compose content, and to do so flexibly. So, this is ideal when it's basically a replacement for the paragraph widget, and it also brings layouts to that widget.
So you just said something super interesting, at least to me, right? So this is using it's merging, like, I don't know, crashing together the layout API, right, from Layout Builder and paragraphs to make basically a nicer tool to build with paragraphs, right? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the one distinction, I guess, or clarification I would make is that it's not really using Layout Builder at all. Layout Builder is not a requirement for the Layout Paragraphs module. It's using the same APIs, the same subsystem, which is the Layout API. If you just Google Layout API, or maybe we can throw that in the references or in the links for later. There's a lot of great information on Drupal.org on how to work with the Layout API. So it uses the Layout API to provide that structure, to provide a way for front-end developers or themers to declare, create behavior for layouts, and then makes it really easy again for content editors to manage paragraphs within that.
So how does that work from a practical standpoint? If I install this module, does it provide all the different sections and layouts, and then I kind of put my component pieces into that, or do I need to create the layout sections and just name them a certain way to tie them together?
Yeah, great questions. No, you do not need to create your own or name any layouts in a particular way. There are a set of layouts that ship with Drupal core. I think it's like 1 column, 2 column, 3 column. And then if I remember right, there are a set of brick layouts, I think, that are still part of Drupal core. So when you turn the module on, you turn on layout paragraphs, you go into your paragraph types, either create a new paragraph type, call it section or something that makes sense to your specific context for attaching layout for creating sections. When you create your new paragraph type, you'll have an option to turn on the layout paragraphs behavior for that layout paragraph type. So it's using the behavior API in paragraphs. When you turn on the layout paragraphs behavior, you'll a select box with all of the different layouts available will appear, and you just choose the ones that you want to be available for that particular paragraph.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Then when you have a reference field from your content type, and you have made sure that that new section paragraph type is available to that content type via that reference field, make sure the field widget is for that reference field is layout paragraphs. And when you go to the edit screen, you're working with, you have this drag and drop capability and the ability to choose sections, et cetera. So it just provides a really easy interface for that.
And I imagine it pulls that into the same edit screen. So you're not going to a separate tab like you do with the layout builder.
Same edit screen. Yeah. So something that was important to us when we started thinking about this solution. So I should say, we've been using paragraphs for a long time. And what we love about paragraphs and what we think is important about paragraphs is that paragraphs provide a way for content editors to create really flexible types of content, to intermix different content components without sacrificing the structure of the content. So it preserves a content model. You can pull the stuff back. I mean, this can get complicated, but you can pull the stuff back with views. You can push it out through JSON API or other means into like a headless setup. There are a lot of reasons that we think we have thought for a long time that paragraphs are really powerful and provide this really kind of powerful system for working with flexible but still structured content. The piece that was challenging for us was the interface, and 2, the lack of just, we want content authors to be able to just not think about this stuff at all, to just hit the interface, it be immediately intuitive, see a plus button, hit the plus button, get a list of components they can choose from. If they choose the section component, immediately choose the layout that they want for their section. Then within that layout, see the different regions, each with their own plus buttons, where they again can just very quickly start editing, adding content. If you want to edit something, hit an edit link. You know what I mean? Like, we just wanted this very simple kind of content flow. So we started. I mean, we, like many other folks, were using paragraphs to create layouts. We were doing it with this like very nested field reference structure, which creates all kinds of problems. Are maybe performance issues. That's a whole other thing to get into. But at the very least, creates interface complexity that it's just really hard for people who are actually writing content to keep track of, like, wait, which one did I click on? Where am I adding content to? Yeah. And so we wanted to, in our view, that needed to be simpler. And so we started working on this tool to combine the layout API again with paragraphs.
What kinds of users did you have in mind as you were developing layout paragraphs?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I love that question. We two types of users specifically, although it's really all falls under a very similar persona or use case, and that is 1, marketers, and 2, editorial staff. So the folks that, and it's interesting, maybe it's been months now, I was meeting with some folks at a major university here in Colorado about layout paragraphs and kind of talking through the options. And, it was a room full of largely Drupal developers and then one person from marketing. And the one person from marketing said, hey, I'm here to watch, but I know this is not for me. Like, I know this is for the rest of y'all, and I just kind of want to see. And by very quickly in the conversation, that dynamic flipped. And it was the person from marketing who was most exciting, who was most excited, who was most interested in what this would unlock for their specific role. And that's exactly what that's exactly what we've been shooting for. That's exactly what we want. And those are the kind of tools that we think we need to see more of.
So what is the current state of the module?
So currently we have 2 releases. There is a 1x stable release, and there is a 2x beta release, soon to also be stable. I run an agency. We do client work. We work with clients. And admittedly, a lot of the development happening on this module for our part is driven by the needs of clients and client projects. So some of that kind of stable, when we get to stable, is in some ways determined by client work, that where we're using that as kind of a test bed for a lot of this.
So I'm gonna drop in a question here, because you brought that up. This module maybe came out of client work, client need. You're adding to it as clients, as clients kind of give you new requirements. Are you devoting, or is Atten devoting a certain amount of time, like outside of client work, obviously, to maintaining and building this module?
Yes, absolutely. A lot more goes into maintaining this module than just client work.
Sure.
But I don't have specific data around how many hours or anything like that.
Yeah, sure.
So the 1x version, to back up to versions for just a second, the 1x version, early on, we tried a few different things, and it became clear pretty quickly that this needed to be a field widget, essentially. So we built it as a field widget. It was a huge single file, basically. It's a very large, layout paragraph field widget.php file, lots of code in there, and did what it needed to, provides a really great interface, is stable, but could be structured better, and could provide some APIs for continuing to push the user experience, and for other subsystems to do, or other systems to do things like limit which paragraphs you can add into which region, or add additional UI enhancements, create styles management. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that we saw is important for this too. So we started and have finished rewriting a 2x branch, which is the same functionality, just structured much better, and provides some underlying APIs for actually working with the suite of functionality. What that also allows us to do is kind of carve out what we think is best fit for the community, and manage that the way community projects, in my opinion, should be managed, via support requests in the issue queue, bug reports in the issue queue, et cetera, while still creating our own add-on modules, or our own add-on functionality, and doing so in a really kind of the Drupal way, but in a way that doesn't have to move at the same pace as what the community stuff does.
So you kind of answered the next question a little bit. So I'd like to pivot a tiny bit and address, can you talk a little bit about that timeline? Like, when did you start this project? When did you kind of realize, hey, this is something that should be a community project that's a little bit bigger than just something, because in my mind, there's different levels of community projects. There's something that, or modules. There's the small utility modules that are just for one client. You'll never release them because they really don't have any utility whatsoever. There's the projects you release to just get back to the community, but they're not really, you kind of admit as you put it up, like, this is a very specific use case. If you don't have it, it's probably not for you. And then there's kind of this level, which is, hey, this is something that has a lot of utility for a lot of people, and we probably will need to dedicate some resources to fleshing that out. Now, obviously, you're not on the hook for building every use case ever. I mean, that's not how the community works. But like you said, with the version 2 branch, you're giving people the ability to write their own tools to hook into your API. Can you talk so to kind of recap that massive question, can you talk a little bit about the timeline and the evolution of the timeline of that project and how you kind of got to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. Wow. I haven't thought, it's been a little while since I thought about when we started working on this. And I'm struggling to even remember what year it was. It's been in the last maybe 3 years that we first started working on the module. You know, now it's 3 or 4 years that we first started working on this approach. And this actually came out of the development first came out of a really, I'll say interesting, although maybe challenging client conversation where I was pushing paragraphs really hard. And the client I was pushing paragraphs with was just not having it and felt like paragraphs was way too complicated and not for their particular use case and what they wanted their authors to be able to do. It just wasn't cutting it. And no matter how hard I pushed about the value of structured content and why content model is so important and what this means for their content down the road, it was just kind of a non-starter for them because they felt like it was too complicated for their users. And I kind of took that back to the team. They went in a different direction and leveraged other tools, other more what we would call like WYSWYG tools, I'd say, for their project. And I took that back to the team and we started thinking about, how can we make this work better? And for months, this was just an internal project. It started as kind of a table view of referenced paragraphs where table cells would have this heading that said what layout section it was in. And after a while, it just became clear that that was too complicated also. And really we should, why not just present the layout the way it's going to look on the front end and the back end. So we kind of went down that road. It also, I should say, and back up a second, initially, so the development I'm talking about right now was actually happening with a module called Entity Reference with Layout, where we were creating a specific type of field reference, a actual reference field. So it was a field type as well as the widget. And the layout data was stored with the field type. So did that for a while. When we had what we thought was a reasonable release, we pushed the code. At some point, the co-maintainer now for layout paragraphs, Italo Maro, might be messing up Italo's last name, but Itamar on Drupal.org, saw entity reference with layout and jumped in and was really excited about what the module provides. And also submitted, I remember he posted opened an issue and posted a patch with all the like coding standards issues of the module at the time. It's just this enormous patch. And that's really what got things started, to be honest, is working with Itamar on that and him kind of seeing what this module was capable of. And he maintains several widely used modules on Drupal.org. And it's does a lot of contribution work. So worked with him on ERL. We eventually decided to move things over to layout paragraphs, and we moved away from a reference field that stores that data and instead are storing the layout data in paragraph behavior. So using the behavior functionality in paragraphs. Finished that 1X branch. It started to gain some steam. I mean, it's really been growing for the last year and a couple months. It started to gain some steam. The 1X branch is considered stable largely from the volume of users. So there's 1,500 people or so using that, 1,500 installs or so. And the correlating like lack of bug reports once things got stable. And that was for about a year. And then now that was for that kind of first year that the module was becoming more widely used and popular. And then this last year, we've been focused on the 2X version and getting that to stable.
So you've mentioned a couple of times that the information is kind of handled using paragraph behaviors. So I guess I'm curious, are you not using content hashes like Layout Builder does to store, like, are they hard references still?
No, they're not. It's all just using a entity reference field.
So things like translation with paragraphs works exactly the same way with layout paragraphs as just native paragraphs.
Exactly. The one difference there, so paragraphs, and I might be messing this up, and it's others will know this better than I do. Paragraphs made the decision to support synchronous translations only in their field widget, in the paragraphs field widget, and both the paragraphs, both the field widgets that come with the paragraphs module. The decision was made at some point, we're going to support synchronous translations. There's just too much room. My understanding is that there's too much room for error and, I mean, data loss, honestly, if you try to move between synchronous and asynchronous in a project with paragraphs. Now, there is a module in Contrib, as far as I know, and you guys may know, again, you guys may know this better than I do. There's a module in Contrib, I think, that does support asynchronous paragraph translations, but the default way of handling that in paragraphs was synchronous. We decided we would support both, so you can turn on synchronous or asynchronous, and there are some concerns, or there's some things to look out for in doing that, and certainly in switching between the two. But we decided to support both. Yeah, I mean, otherwise, yes, translation works. I mean, it's just a field reference. It's just an entity field reference.
So I'm hearing is you guys are not afraid of complexity. Take it out.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, one nice thing, I guess, is that layout paragraphs doesn't have the massive user base yet that paragraphs does, and it never will that paragraphs does. I mean, paragraphs are just so widely used. So, you know, I haven't talked to the maintainers specifically about this, but my guess is that, I mean, you know, complexity multiplied times user base gets, I mean, can get a little out of control. Yeah, exactly. So,
I mean, I gotta feel like down the road, the layout paragraphs user base will probably skyrocket or go up. I mean, paragraphs out of the box is like the usability of it isn't great, especially if you're doing component based layouts and more complex things with it. So like, I feel like that's the intersection where layout paragraphs makes the most sense.
Yeah, totally. I think so too. We're hovering around 2,500 installs based on Drupal.org right now. I say hovering, I mean, that number goes up weekly. I think once we hit stable for 2x, I think that'll be a big driver for adoption. That tends to be a driver for adoption. I don't think we're far off. Again, some of that's just determined for us. It's just a matter of when it's timed a little bit with client projects and when we feel really good about saying, okay, this is stable. Yeah, you know, Nick, it's interesting to back up for a second. I think, sure, we're comfortable with complexity, but also because this is just a single flat reference field, like really at the end of the day, it's not that complex, at least from my perspective, not that complex. You're talking about a single reference field where all of the paragraphs are attached to the parent. Okay. The structure, the layout structure itself is derived from, you know, each paragraph just saves what region it belongs to and what its parent is. But they're all stored on just via that reference field. So it makes retrieval of those paragraphs, pulling them into views. I mean, all the stuff that we've thought was kind of powerful about that approach in the past still maintains. It's just that in addition, we kind of decorate each paragraph with, or we add, you know, attributes for via the behavior system to what region they belong to.
That's great to know.
Justin, you've referred to layout paragraphs as an evolution of WYSWYG. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think ultimately, we end up asking content editors to do a lot, and they kind of hold a lot in their brain when working on content. So folks who care about content, you know, and we do this, like, I think with the goal of creating really flexible systems that again also preserve the integrity of the underlying data, preserve that content model, make it easier to migrate content in, migrate content out, push content out to apps, et cetera. I mean, all super important and all really strong use cases for Drupal. I think the challenge is when we create these, in order to support that content model, we create these interfaces that are no longer a very good representation of what the content, a very good visual representation of what the content is actually going to look like, which is the whole goal of WYSWYG, and I think has been all along. Early on, I mean, WYSWYGs were, in my opinion, WYSWYGs were really problematic early on, especially. And this whole idea of, wanting to provide a tool for a content editor to have a high level of confidence in what they're entering into the system, that they know what kind of this is going to look like and how it's going to present once they're actually viewing it. There's this competing interest again around content structure. And very early on, this looked like, I kind of date myself a little bit, but with the web standards movement in the early, it kind of took off very early in 2000s. We came to understand just the strong importance of integrity of the actual underlying content, the underlying markup, at the same time wanting to provide some kind of visual experience for end users to actually enter that content. But you really saw that friction when, content editors, for great reasons, would all caps their content because they wanted it to have some emphasis or something, or because they wanted it to be a heading, or they, this isn't big enough. And so they'd increase the font size, which creates this like font size equals 16px or whatever, 22px in the underlying code. And was really problematic in terms of preserving that content structure, the actual underlying data structure. So I think there's always been that tension. I think what our goal is to provide is to create an interface that is both really flexible and provides tools to content authors to create content that they can really understand, where they're empowered to create content that is what they need it to be for marketing or editorial purposes, but at the same time preserves the content model and content structure. And that's kind of where we see, that's how we see layout paragraphs kind of bridging that gap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can maybe just have a follow-up. We've already talked a little bit about, paragraphs and layout builder as some of the other tools that you looked at. Did you also look at things like Gutenberg as well? Is there any inspiration from those kinds of projects? Absolutely, we did, and there is 100%. There is inspiration from the Gutenberg project, things like Elementor and for WordPress, but also just Gutenberg. And also, I mean, CK Editor is making huge strides, and CK Editor 5 has some really interesting functionality. And there's a lot you can do with like upcasting and downcasting with CK Editor, so you can kind of represent visually pretty complex structure. The challenge, what I think gets challenging is then storing that data, that content as essentially serialized data, which kind of goes back to something you said a little bit ago, Nick, just dumping it into a field in the database. It can make all kinds of things difficult in the future. Migrations can be difficult, translations difficult, managing the assets that you're referencing from in a WYSWYG, like then managing that asset as a content management system managed asset gets a little bit difficult. That link is less stable. So for all those reasons, we wanted something that really followed this stricter content model approach, where the references are stored as stored in the relation. I mean, typically in a relational database. The relational part I don't think matters too much. It's the structure part that matters.
So clearly on today's show, I pulled the short straw with the unpopular or maybe unpopular question. So you just were talking about, content editors and how you're building a system for content editors to be able to add, content to sites, and your, layout paragraphs provides this amazing kind of layout system for paragraphs. But my question, one keeps gnawing at the back of my head is, you put so much effort into paragraphs. but why? Why paragraphs? Why not, maybe build a better layout system for Layout Builder or something else?
Oh, great question, John. So I think, well, one, simply because paragraphs is where we were, like paragraphs is what we were using. And not only us, lots of people are using paragraphs. And even the fact, I mentioned this earlier, but you all did a show recently, Layout Builder. Yeah, Layout Builder versus paragraphs as a layout tool. And I think it's really interesting. In my mind, they're very different. Like their use cases are very different. Paragraphs is all about content. Layout Builder is all about structuring essentially blocks in a layout. It seemed like two different things to me. I think that said, that shows just the wild popularity of paragraphs and the fact that it's used everywhere. And already, paragraphs were designed to solve this problem of, flexible. I heard the phrase like composable content. I think I heard this on the show actually. Composable content. Paragraphs are designed to solve that problem. So it seemed like a great place to start, creating a system that just makes it easier to work with something that's already used all over the place. Also, the fact that another thing that kind of pushed us toward paragraphs is the fact that, so many folks use it, and if done successfully, we thought we could do this in a way where there was no migration necessary, which is absolutely true. Like there is no migration necessary. If you're already using paragraphs on your site, you can install layout paragraphs. You immediately get some of the interface enhancements around drag and drop capability and just some of the really kind of fast, intuitive, easy to use interface elements. But if you just want it, you turn it on, you create a new section paragraph type, choose what layouts you want to be available in that section, and you're off and running with this, which also means that adoption would be a lot simpler.
So when you say no migration necessary, are you saying like you can, if I have a site that heavily uses paragraphs and uses paragraphs to create layout decisions, I can just edit that entity reference field or entity revisions reference field and convert it to a section layout?
No, that sounds really cool though. No, not. So what I mean is if you're using a site that already uses paragraphs, because this is essentially a field widget, you can turn it on and it just works for your current setup. You'll still have to create a new paragraph type or choose a paragraph type to be a section type. And you would still have to do a migration if you were using heavily nested paragraphs, although you're migrating from paragraphs to paragraphs, which is ostensibly easier than, yeah, exactly, than paragraphs to something else.
I mean, honestly, I feel like you could do that. You would just have to have something that default puts everything in a full width column section.
Yeah.
So that everything that already exists is just there. Go ahead.
No, that's a great idea. I mean, one thing that gets interesting, and this goes back to that, managing functionality for the wider community, that's a pretty strong assumption that folks would want to turn it on and immediately have everything in a layout. And for that matter, I mean, we're not even making the assumption with layout paragraphs that someone would want to use layout with this widget. So you can turn it on. Again, you can turn it on, have the benefits of, I mean, the drag and drop interface is really, it's really nice. It's just super intuitive, super easy to use. And you can use it to manage a flat list and then choose when you want to turn on that layout capability.
Interesting.
Just do so. And the layout capability, it's kind of carried by just a paragraph type. So you can have a section paragraph that has, a title field, a body field if you want it to. And then also, because you've said this is going to be a section paragraph, it will just also have that layout selection capability. It makes it behave as a layout container. One thing before I get away from it, John, I think that back to your question about why paragraphs. So that's why paragraphs is because of the adoption, because there's already, lots of systems that we wanted to still work and support this, because in our own projects, we use paragraphs and we didn't want to do something that would require us even to do these migrations. That said, I do think long-term, there's an opportunity here to even further generalize this and just think of it more as like entity layout or content layout or something like that. The goal for us, and this is what I know we'll get into this in a bit, but I think a big difference. The goal for us is to just really focus on people working with content not site builders, not developers, people working with content.
Okay.
And for us right now, I feel like the use case is primarily in using paragraphs. I think that's where a lot of people, again, the decision seems to be, do we use layout builder or paragraphs? Like paragraphs so widely used. So that's why we went that way. But I think eventually, it could certainly be used for other referenced entity types.
And it sounds like this pushes you very much towards one of the big benefits of layout builder is you kind of get pushed towards really atomic structured content. So like you're not building something that has, like you mentioned, nested paragraphs. You're saying like, this is a text block. This is a title with an image block or something. Like you're not creating these massive, like add another
Totally. Yeah.
Components.
We had, in some iteration of our own website back in Drupal 7, we had this, obviously you could do this differently, but we had, a 2-image plus text paragraph type. We had a 2-column text plus 1 image, or, hero image plus this and that. And this gets
and you have the drop down that says put the media on the left or the right.
Totally. And this gets completely away from that. With this approach, you would first choose kind of the container you want, and then you can, just what you said, Nick, like a very atomic, very simple. It allows creating some really interesting content out of a very simple, small set of building blocks.
Yeah. And I imagine you still have some compound ones, just like carousels, for example. You have the ability to add 3, 4, 5, 10 items to it, but I think it simplifies the architecture.
Wait, people still add carousels to websites? Come on.
Absolutely, unfortunately.
They're
never going away.
No comment on the value of
that. But
right.
Getting rid of carousels. So Justin, can you maybe give us a little bit of a breakdown of what's similar and different between layout builder and layout paragraphs?
Absolutely. And thanks, Nick. We get this question all the time for a lot of really obvious reasons. One simply being the name of the module, the name of the 2 modules. I think just to start really quickly with the similarities, first of all, they're both built on the layout API. They both provide layout discovery, where they, both systems kind of discover what layouts are available or what layouts have been declared and supported in your Drupal site. And they both provide a drag and drop means of a visual drag and drop interface for managing layouts on a Drupal site. Those are some of the similarities. To start with layout builder, layout builder, to be honest, is in many ways just a much more powerful tool. It's in Drupal core. For us, it's sort of become the de facto way of managing layouts across an entire site, and really has taken over, what we used to do in Display Suite in many ways, and what happens on we use that to replace what happens on like the managed display, especially for the full view mode. So for managing a full view mode on an entity, we use Layout Builder, and Layout Builder provides a way of, you're basically working with blocks. It also in many ways is replacement for the core block layout management screen and admin structure. I feel like that just scratches the surface on what Layout Builder is, but from our view, Layout Builder is a site builder's tool and a developer's tool, and it's still something that we use in most, if not all client projects use Layout Builder in some way. Layout Paragraphs, on the other hand, is all about working with content on the page, purely about working with content on the page. And it really follows the same model that Drupal has used for years now of, fieldable content entities. And in the case of paragraphs, fieldable content entities attached to a host entity. And Layout Paragraphs provides a way of working with that content. So for us, the major difference is that it's kind of use case driven or persona driven. Site builders and developers use Layout Builder, at least for us, on our team. Like site builders and Developers use Layout Builder and use Layout Builder to create layouts across an entire site, and then also kind of break the mold when needed for those layouts.
Okay.
On the flip side, we use layout paragraphs when we want to create an environment or create an interface where content editors can really easily, quickly create content, kind of compose content for their site. Does that make sense as a difference?
Yeah.
So it opens up a question for me, and maybe I just misunderstood what you said, but like, so you're likening layout paragraphs to like a content editor tool, right? So devoid of the site builder layout of the page. Is that accurate?
It is. The layout provided in layout paragraphs is really relegated to whatever the kind of content wrapper is for that field. So you can design, I mean, there are plenty of sites where we have layout builder is controlling the header of the page, the sidebar of the page, the footer of the page, and then also saying where the fields of the specific node you're looking at, saying like where those fields should be output on that screen.
Sure.
When one of those fields is a paragraph field, is like this kind of flexible content field, we use layout paragraphs for that field specifically, which is often kind of a smaller element on the page. And it depends site to site. I mean, some sites don't need the sidebar, and that's kind of more blown up. If you look at on our own site, if you go to and most of our pages are managed by layout paragraphs. If you look at any of the case studies on our own agency website, all of those are managed by layout paragraphs. They're really a pretty good use case for layout paragraphs, like any kind of longer, more visual, where you're again, like creating unique content one page to the next. That's where it kind of shines.
Interesting. So I'm thinking of like a component-based layout, right? Where like the scenario you just described, where you're using layout builder to position fields, using layout builder to position different like page level elements, right? So layout paragraphs comes in, and is that just styling and placing a single component, or could you have like a couple of different components in one layout paragraph field, I guess would be the way to say that?
Yeah, so there's a single layout paragraph field, which is also just a paragraph field. So a single paragraph field, you can have as many paragraphs attached there as you want. I mean, usually, in fact, it's virtually never just one. As a matter of fact, there's a bug open on Drupal.org right now where if you set the cardinality to just one, it doesn't actually limit you, because who would ever want to, like, what value is it to create a layout on a page that only has one thing in it?
Yeah.
So it is for multiple things. And you can have multiple layout paragraph fields on a single node, which again is why we wanted to kind of go that more traditional route of fields, field references, widgets, exactly, is to support that. So you can have you can absolutely have, and we often do have multiple fields on a content type that are, multiple paragraph fields where each one is using layout paragraphs.
I see. So like in my head now, I've built this super complex like page where like I have layout paragraph fields that are like bundling like content together, and then like being able through layout builder to move them around the page all willy-nilly.
Oh, gotcha. No, I think it's simpler than that. And I think, layout paragraphs would be if your content editors want to be able to create content that's text followed by a quote, an image. Now I want a 2-section thing with an image on one side and a quote on the other, followed by text, followed by an image gallery. Ideal for layout paragraphs. And if you it's also really quick to install and get up and running with, really easy to kind of experiment with. But if you experiment with the two side by side, Layout Builder provides that capability with creating one-off pages with Layout Builder and then building that page up with blocks. But it's just not the same experience as using layout paragraphs. And you can, I think, with enough contrib modules added, possibly some core patches, you can get Layout Builder to that. I think you can get Layout Builder to that, but it feels like a lot of hoops to jump through from our perspective to provide ultimately what paragraphs does really well, which is this, flexible, John, I think it's an expression I'm stealing from you, composable content,
Sounds like something I would say.
Cool. So anyways, that's where we see those two come into play, is layout builder, site building tool, creating that structure across the site, layout paragraphs, a tool for authors, a tool for marketers, a tool for editorial staff. Yeah, and a lot of folks we've talked to, some of those differences are even more apparent kind of working with the two side by side. I heard this on the recent episode about from you all about paragraphs versus layout builder. Also, that the expectation of layout builder before it was released for this very simple, streamlined interface for creating flexible landing pages. In reality, it needs to do so much that the experience is a little more complicated than that. The reality is just simply more complicated than that. And that's okay. I mean, we need the flexibility that it provides. And with that flexibility comes complexity. Layout paragraphs doesn't need all that. It's very focused on just content, just adding content to this very specific page that you're working on.
So before we move into kind of the future of layout paragraphs and what's coming next, we have a listener question from Stephen. Is there a way to show the label of the paragraph type without needing to hover over the content on the edit screen?
That is a great question, and I'm not sure offhand. I know that there is so in the 1X branch, there was a configuration option for showing paragraph type labels, and they would always show up. And I think maybe in the bottom right corner of each paragraph. So if you can imagine a page that's built up of different content components, if you had a block of text followed by a layout with 3 columns, that block of text would say text down in the right-hand corner. The layout might say 3-section layout down in the right-hand corner. I know for us, we rarely use that feature. So it's something I just rarely look at. We're using such, again, to go back to what you said, Nick, such like atomic components, like such small, singularly purpose components, that it just isn't that necessary to label in it text as text or image as image. You certainly could do that with pretty simply just using the hook system in Drupal and just adding that label or even not even the hook system, just adding a custom template that adds that label, which is again one of the reasons we wanted to use something like paragraphs, is that it still hooks into all of those underlying Drupal APIs. So I would check the settings page. I can't remember if it's there or not. And if it's not there, adding that to your template, to the actual twig template for your paragraph, should be pretty straightforward.
So Justin, you mentioned before that you're in the process of trying to get version 2 stable. Give us a sense of what's ahead, what's on the roadmap for layout paragraphs.
Yeah, great question. So I think features will slow down. I don't think we're adding much in terms of features. We want to make sure that all of the APIs are providing the necessary kind of touch points for interacting with the functionality of layout paragraphs. One example of a module that I would love to see developed for the 2X branch, there's a version for the 1X branch, but I'd love to see something fully developed for the 2X branch, is a module that would restrict what paragraphs go in what regions, and perhaps not just what regions, but maybe based on other criteria too. Like, this component can go in this region when it's 1 level deep, but not 2 levels deep, et cetera, like creating some really interesting kind of business logic around that. And in order for that to work, we have to have APIs that say, you can add components or paragraphs in this context, but not that context, or for just managing that and for altering that. We have to have APIs in the drag and drop interface for preventing someone from dragging something into a region where they should not be able to drag it. Those APIs are there. We just want to see that they're not just there, but really performing as they need to support those behaviors. Beyond that, we have a bunch of client work that's going live using layout paragraphs, and some of the timing around stable is in some ways dependent on that. I'd like to make sure that once we do have a stable release, that the continuing release cycle can slow down. So as we find, even just today, I pushed a change, a patch that had been reviewed by the community that was a particular class or a particular CSS rule wasn't quite specific enough when Claro was turned on. So it works for in other contexts, but not when Claro was turned on. So things like that, like we're continuing to kind of harden some of that and get that to stable. I think, beyond that, my goal would be, for us, we're going to keep working on ways to push the authoring experience forward. And maybe this is a good place to mention this product that we've been working on called Mercury Editor, which is built on top of layout paragraphs. It's not available on Drupal.org yet. I would like it to get to a place where it is available on Drupal.org, but the reality is right now it's very prescriptive, and even the way it adds CSS and some of the assumptions that it makes seem a little too specific for a general purpose. But I think as layout paragraphs, as we get to stable on 2x, we can continue to focus on some of those other enhancements that are built on top of that. And so hopefully kind of feature development can slow down and we just see more, bug fixes as they arise and continuing to improve those underlying APIs.
So we will actually add a video about the Mercury Editor to the show notes for people to learn more about that.
That's great.
I have a question though. You just said that there was not a full release to the Mercury Editor. Do you have a target date? Like, could we possibly see Mercury Editor at DrupalCon? Like, no pressure, just wondering.
That would be awesome. You will undoubtedly, we'll have a booth at DrupalCon. Swing by and you will see Mercury Editor. I doubt we'll have a community release for Mercury Editor by then. So just to talk about that for just a minute, if that's all right, Mercury Editor is really a very small collection of customizations on top of, first and foremost, layout paragraphs, but also 3 or 4 other much smaller modules for which the usage is also much narrower. It doesn't have nearly the usage as layout paragraphs. And the whole goal is just to further streamline the UI for a particular set of editorial use cases. So it's to make a really easy, super intuitive content editing tool. But again, I'm just not sure that it's general, like trying to figure out how to make that general purpose enough for the community. In the meantime, as we identify pieces within that, so one example is one thing that comes with Mercury is when you create a new text component, instead of opening a pop-up where you type your text, you choose text as the component you want to add, and it just immediately adds the WYSWYG to the page you're looking at, and you can start typing. So you're just much like Quick Edit, but even faster than Quick Edit. If you can imagine, like you click plus to add a new component, you hit text, and then boom, you're just writing right there. And as you're writing, it's saving that to the layout paragraphs instance. That's something that we will be releasing, and we'll be releasing as a contrib module that works with layout paragraphs. And that's a good example of those kinds of modules or systems that Mercury kind of pulls together to add these enhancements, if that makes sense. So each piece, we're very, very much dedicated to making this as widely accessible and general purpose as possible. The balance is figuring out which pieces really we can really support for a broader community and which pieces we just couldn't really support for a broader community.
It sounds exciting. And once it's released, maybe we can have you back on to talk a little bit more about that.
That'd be great.
But for our listeners right now, if they're getting excited about layout paragraphs and wanted to get started, what's the best way for them to get started with layout paragraphs?
Yeah, just go to the module page on Drupal.org. So if you go to Drupal.org/project/layout_paragraphs, and I'm sure there'll be a link in the show notes. Go to the module page. There's a quick how-to on the module page itself. There's a very little bit of documentation that's available specifically about upgrading from 1x to 2x. Most folks won't need that. Download the module. I recommend folks grab the 2x branch. The 2x branch is I think absolutely stable, ready to go. One thing worth mentioning about that too is we have much better test coverage for the 2x branch. What I really should say is we have test coverage for 2x. We do not have it for 1x. 1x, we're purely relying on user-reported issues, user-reported bug reports.
Okay.
With the 2x branch, most use cases have automated tests with them. I would recommend downloading the 2x branch from the module page, install it, and you're good to go. Instructions on how to actually get started are on the project page. It is very simple.
Okay.
So, Justin, if one of our listeners is interested in helping to work on layout paragraphs, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I would personally love to see that. And right from the module page, go to the issue queue. There are a number of open issues in the issue queue, and feel free to post. Please do post either bug reports or feature requests in the issue queue. Love seeing those come in. And there's been quite a bit of involvement for what is still a relatively new contrib module.
So Justin, before we bring the show in for a landing, question on headless Drupal. So obviously there's been a boom about the headless and decoupled sites. Wondering if there's a way for layout paragraphs to help build structured content and build sites in a headless manner.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the things that is really great about Drupal and about working with the community, is just seeing kind of the different directions people go with things that were just like not on my radar or not on the radar of people who, originally create these modules. In this case, layout paragraphs. I know of several folks who are using layout paragraphs in headless situations and decouple projects. And, I know fundamentally, and I should say actually before I jump into how that's working, that's not something I've done yet. It's something that it looks like we're going to be kicking off some work there pretty soon, and that I'll personally be involved in some of that pretty soon. But it's not something I've personally done yet. It is something I know folks are doing. And I know that the underlying capability is derived from the fact that layout paragraphs really is just a field reference. So it works the same way a reference field, any other reference field would work, as far as exposing that content via JSON API or any other, other methods that are out there. Again, and there's a lot of ways you could do that. You could push kind of the raw rendered value of the field, but you can also push the structured data out through JSON API, and the references from each paragraph that say what region they belong to, again, are stored in that paragraph behavior. Getting that in the JSON API, getting that out via JSON API should be straightforward. I'll also say, just back to the module that you all covered this week, I'm kind of excited to take that for a spin, the node preview tab, because I'm kind of interested in what the output is by default for layout paragraphs. But again, it is just a node reference field or an entity reference field.
Awesome. We'll catch up with you on Twitter to see what your review of the preview tab is.
That's great.
Justin, thank you for joining us. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really awesome to have been here and again have a chance to talk about something that I talk about as much as I can. Thanks, guys.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with the show hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. And if you're interested in show news, upcoming Drupal camps, meetups, Chad's Book Corner, or Abby's biweekly game review, you can sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
We love promoting Drupal community events here on Talking Drupal, and we can promote your Drupal community event. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron.
Justin, if folks wanted to find you, contact you, talk to you more about layout paragraphs, how could they do that?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me directly. Even just reach out to me directly through email, justin@atten.io. Also, I see all the issues that pop up for layout paragraphs. If you go to the module project page at drupal.org/project/layout_paragraphs, jump in the issue queue. I would love to see folks participating there.
Great. Martin, where can folks find you?
On Drupal.org, Drupal Slack, and various social platforms, they can find me as @Maniclue.
Awesome. Nick Laughlin.
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Have a good one, everyone.